When you are 7 months pregnant, a midnight phone call from the local police department is your absolute worst nightmare. The young officer on the other end of the line calmly told me that my husband was currently in the emergency room. He had wrapped his luxury SUV around an oak tree on the edge of town. But the real horror did not come from the accident itself. The real horror came when I frantically arrived at the hospital soaked in rain, terrified I was about to become a widow. The attending trauma physician pulled me aside and gently warned me that what I was about to see might deeply shock me. I forcefully pulled back the thin, sterile hospital curtain, expecting to see my husband clinging desperately to life. Instead, I saw him consciously sharing a cramped trauma bay with the one person who was supposed to be my own flesh and blood. She was sitting on the adjacent mattress, hastily attempting to button up her ruined, incredibly expensive designer blouse. My name is Madeline, I am 33 years old. And the life I genuinely thought I was securely building turned out to be a meticulous, suffocating masterclass in deception. Before I reveal the exact moment my entire world permanently shattered, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your absolute trust broken by the exact people who should have protected it the most. The harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room buzzed relentlessly overhead like a swarm of angry bees. I waddled frantically past the triage desk, one hand clutching my heavy, pregnant belly, the other desperately gripping the leather strap of my purse. My heart hammered against my ribs, so I genuinely thought I might collapse right there on the cold linoleum floor. I had driven dangerously through a blinding rainstorm, convinced I was about to become a single mother, before my child even took their first breath of air. A uniformed police officer met me just outside Trauma Bay 4. He held an aluminum clipboard tight against his chest. His dark uniform was damp from the storm, and his expression carried a heavy, awkward weight. He did not look like a professional about to deliver the routine news of a simple traffic accident. "Are you the legal wife of Bradley?" he asked, his eyes dropping briefly to my visibly pregnant stomach before darting uncomfortably away. I nodded rapidly, practically gasping for air. "Is he alive?" "Please, just tell me he is alive, he is stable," the officer replied, his voice painfully measured. "But there are some specific details regarding the crash that you need to be aware of before you go in there." The officer handed me a carbon copy of the preliminary accident report. I scanned the thin paper, my eyes snagging hard on the clinical typed words. The vehicle left the roadway at high speed. The driver suffered moderate injuries due to blunt force impact. I looked up, thoroughly confused. He was not wearing his seatbelt. I asked. Bradley was obsessively meticulous about his luxury cars. He never drove a single block without a seatbelt. The officer shifted his weight, looking profoundly, physically uncomfortable. "No, ma'am. He was not wearing his seatbelt. According to the physical evidence at the scene and the exact position we found them in, he was inappropriately engaged with his passenger at the absolute time of impact." The words hung heavy and thick in the sterile hospital air. Inappropriately engaged, passenger. I pushed past the officer, my hands shaking so I could barely grasp the cheap fabric of the privacy curtain. I yanked it back, the plastic rings screeching loudly against the metal track. Bradley lay flat on the hospital bed nearest the heavy door. His head was wrapped in thick, bright white gauze, and his left arm rested securely in a medical sling. But my eyes did not stay on my husband for long. They moved instantly to the adjacent bed. Sitting there, casually swinging her bare legs over the edge of the mattress, was Abigail. My 28-year-old biological sister, the absolute golden child of our toxic family, who had just returned from a luxury gap year in Europe, a trip fully funded by our parents. Her pristine blonde hair was deeply tangled, and she was frantically trying to button up a torn, pale silk blouse that hung incredibly awkwardly off her bare shoulder. She did not look guilty. She did not look even slightly horrified that her pregnant sister had just walked in and caught her half-naked next to her own husband. Instead, Abigail was glaring at a young, exhausted nurse who was simply trying to check her basic vitals. "Do you have any idea how much these actually cost?" Abigail whined loudly, kicking off a scuffed pink high heel. These are authentic Chanel. My mother literally bought them for me yesterday, just to celebrate my homecoming. You people deliberately cut the leather strap when you pulled me out of the car. Who is going to reimburse me for this? I stood paralyzed in the doorway. The shrill sound of my sister loudly complaining about designer shoes drowned out the steady, rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitors. Our parents had always treated Abigail like absolute royalty, constantly showering her with expensive gifts and endless, unearned praise. Meanwhile, they consistently treated me like a boring afterthought, a dependable, boring accountant who was only useful for fixing their complex tax returns or helping them balance their overdrafted checkbooks. But this was a new, unimaginable level of profound cruelty. She had been intimately sleeping with my husband, the father of the child currently kicking inside my womb. Abigail, I breathed, my voice cracking under the crushing weight of the betrayal. She finally looked up, noticing me standing frozen in the doorway. She did not flinch, she did not offer a single word of apology, she just casually rolled her eyes and crossed her arms defensively over her ruined blouse. "Oh great," Abigail muttered, leaning casually back against the thin pillows. "Here comes the drama. You should really tell your husband to keep his eyes focused on the road, Madeline. This whole night has been a complete disaster for my wardrobe." Before I could even attempt to process the absolute, sickening audacity of her words, a low, pained groan came from the other bed. Bradley was waking up. I took a slow, hesitant step toward him, my ingrained instinct as a deeply worried wife temporarily overriding my paralyzing shock. I placed a protective hand on my round belly, desperately waiting for him to look at me. I waited for him to see my hot tears, to instantly ask if our baby was okay, to break down and beg for my forgiveness for destroying our entire marriage. Bradley blinked hard against the harsh fluorescent lighting. He slowly turned his head, his hazy gaze sweeping right past me as if I were nothing more than a medical coat rack. His eyes locked and desperately onto my sister. "Where is Abigail?" He barked loudly at the nurse, his voice rough but filled with genuine, blinding panic. "Is she okay? Tell me she is not hurt. I am right here, babe," Abigail cooed, her voice softening instantly into a sickly sweet tone. "They ruined my expensive shoes, but I am totally fine." Bradley let out a massive, visible sigh of profound relief. Then finally his eyes landed on me. The raw panic in his expression vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, hard, unmistakable irritation. He looked directly at my tear-stained face, then down at my pregnant belly and actually scowled. He turned sharply back to the attending nurse. "Get her out of here," he snapped aggressively, pointing a bandaged, shaking finger right at my chest. "Tell my wife to leave right now. She is stressing me out, and I need to focus on Abigail right now." The sharp, physical sting of Bradley's command hung in the sterilized air of the trauma bay. "Get my wife out of here." He had looked right through me, past the unborn child growing inside me, and focused his entire emotional capacity on the woman adjusting her torn silk blouse. The attending nurse shifted incredibly awkwardly, her eyes darting nervously between my tear-streaked face and the beeping monitor beside Bradley's bed. I opened my mouth to speak, to scream, to demand how he could possibly do this to me, but the heavy double doors of the emergency room flew open with a violent, echoing crash. Loud, incredibly frantic footsteps echoed rapidly down the linoleum hallway. I turned just in time to see my parents, Thomas and Catherine, sprinting toward Trauma Bay 4. They were impeccably dressed in their pristine Saturday country club attire. My mother wore her crisp, pleated white tennis skirt, and my father had on a perfectly pressed pastel golf polo. They looked entirely, absurdly out of place amidst the blood and clinical chaos of the emergency room, but their eyes were wild with a very specific, singular panic. It was not panic for me. It was not panic for their unborn grandchild. Catherine spotted Abigail first. She let out a high-pitched, theatrical gasp and barreled forward, ignoring the tight space between the bulky medical carts. I was standing directly in her path, too heavy and emotionally exhausted to move out of the way in time. My mother did not even attempt to slow down. She deliberately lowered her shoulder and shoved me incredibly hard to the side. The sheer force of her elbow caught me right in the ribs, throwing me off balance. I stumbled backward, my hands flying up desperately to protect my stomach, and crashed against the metal edge of a heart monitor stand. A sharp, localized pain shot through month pregnant belly, forcing a breathless, terrified gasp from my lungs. Catherine did not even look back. She threw herself dramatically over Abigail's bed, burying her face deeply in my sister's tangled blonde hair. "Oh, my poor sweet baby," Catherine wailed loudly, her hands frantically assessing the tiny, superficial scratch on Abigail's forehead. "Look at you, you are bleeding, you must be in so much agonizing pain. It is okay, Mommy is right here." I gripped the cold metal stand tightly, actively fighting through the sudden, intense wave of nausea. I looked over at my father, fully expecting him to at least ask if the baby and I were unharmed from the brutal collision. Instead, Thomas marched straight past me, not making eye contact, and stepped directly up to Bradley's bedside. He patted my cheating husband's uninjured shoulder with deep, fatherly affection. "Bradley, son, are you all right?" Thomas asked, his tone dripping with misplaced, sickening concern. "How is the SUV? Tell me the insurance fully covers the front end. We have the charity gala next month and you cannot be seen driving a pathetic rental car." The sheer, monumental absurdity of the moment washed over me like freezing ice water. My husband was bandaged and bruised from a horrific car crash. His sister was half-naked in the hospital bed right next to him. The police officer had just confirmed they were intimately entangled at the exact time of the high-speed impact. And my parents were consumed with worrying about a scratched forehead and the optics of a luxury vehicle. I forced myself to stand up straight, pushing the physical pain in my abdomen aside. I looked at the pair of them, this twisted, deeply portrait of a family, and felt something fundamental inside me permanently snap. "What is wrong with you people?" I demanded, my voice cutting sharply through Catherine's dramatic, theatrical sobbing. They were in the car intimately together. He crashed into a tree because he was sleeping with my sister. "I want a full explanation right now." Abigail let out a theatrical whimper and buried her face deeper into our mother's shoulder. "Make her stop yelling at me," Abigail cried. "My head hurts too much for her pathetic jealousy right now." Thomas spun around to face me, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. He took 2 aggressive steps forward, invading my personal space, and pointed a stern, authoritative finger directly at my face. He shushed me so loudly that a passing doctor physically paused in the hallway. "Keep your voice down," Thomas hissed, his eyes wide with fury. "Do not make a scene in a public place. If you have a problem with your marriage, you deal with it at home quietly like an adult." "Deal with it quietly?" I asked, my voice rising in utter, paralyzing disbelief. My husband was driving without his pants on, with my biological sister in the passenger seat. "There is an official police report. How exactly am I supposed to deal with that quietly?" Thomas scoffed, looking me up and down with utter, unfiltered disgust. He took in my sensible maternity slacks, my comfortable flats, and my messy bun. "If you actively bothered to dress up and entertain your husband, instead of staring at boring spreadsheets all day, he would not have needed your sister's comfort," Thomas spat out. "Bradley is a high-powered investment director. He deals with stress. He needs a wife who understands high society, who genuinely knows how to be a companion. All you do is crunch numbers and act like a boring, lifeless accountant. You drove him to this." I stared at the man who had raised me, listening to him shamelessly justify his son-in-law's infidelity by blaming my career. The very career I used to secretly untangle his massive, borderline illegal tax liabilities every single April. The precise career that actively paid for the roof over my head while he and Catherine blew their money on expensive country club dues and Abigail's lavish European vacations. Catherine turned away from Abigail just long enough to casually chime in. "Your sister has had a very rough time adjusting since she got back from Europe, Madeline. She has been deeply depressed. Bradley was just being a supportive brother-in-law, taking her out for a late-night drive to cheer her up. You are taking a simple misunderstanding and actively trying to ruin everyone's day with your hormonal mood swings." "A supportive brother-in-law," I repeated, the heavy words tasting like pure ash in my mouth. "Is that what we are calling it now?" Before Catherine could actively deliver another venomous excuse, the hospital billing coordinator walked briskly into the trauma bay. She held a digital tablet and looked around the crowded space with a strained, professional smile. "Excuse me," the coordinator said loudly. "Abigail's chart indicates she is ready to be moved from the trauma bay, but she is demanding the VIP recovery suite on the top floor. I need to inform you that your current health insurance does not cover elective luxury room upgrades for minor scrapes. We will require an out-of-pocket payment of $3,000 upfront." Abigail immediately started whining loudly, kicking her bare feet against the thin hospital blankets. "I am not staying in a regular disgusting room, Mom. The beds are scratchy, and the nurses are rude to me. I need the suite with the good view, so I can properly recover from my severe trauma." Catherine immediately went into full obsessive appeasement mode. "Do not worry, my sweet girl, Mommy will get you the absolute best room they have." Catherine patted Abigail's cheek, then turned her back on her golden child. The doting, loving mother vanished instantly, replaced by the demanding, entitled woman I had dealt with my entire life. Catherine marched right up to me, holding out her hand, palm up. She snapped her fingers twice, impatiently. "Give me your card," Catherine ordered, "the platinum one. Your father and I left our wallets in the golf cart when we rushed over here. Pay the woman so your traumatized sister can finally get some rest." I looked down at my mother's outstretched hand. I looked at Abigail, who was already pulling a compact mirror from her ruined designer purse to eagerly check her lip gloss. I looked at Bradley, who was glaring at me with open, unfiltered hostility for not leaving the room fast enough. For 33 years, I had successfully played the role of the quiet, dependable workhorse. I had silently funded their mistakes, absorbed their cruel insults, and obediently handed over my hard-earned money whenever the golden child threw a tantrum. But looking directly at that outstretched hand, feeling the sharp, dull ache in my belly where my own mother had shoved me, the dependable workhorse officially died. I gripped the leather strap of my purse tightly. I looked Catherine dead in the eye, my voice dropping to a terrifying, icy whisper. No, Catherine's face twisted into an incredibly ugly mask of pure outrage. She actually reached forward, her manicured fingers clawing at the leather strap of my purse. "You ungrateful little brat," Catherine hissed. "Your sister is bleeding on a hospital bed, and you want to greedily hoard your pennies. Give me the card right now." Thomas stepped forward, his chest puffed out, deeply invading my space. He towered over me, actively trying to use his physical size to force my total compliance, exactly as he had done since I was a child. "Hand it over, Madeline. Stop humiliating us in front of these nurses." Before my father could lay a single hand on my bag, a sharp, incredibly commanding voice cut through the sterile air of the trauma bay. "Step away from my client, Thomas, right now." The sharp sound of high heels clacking against the linoleum announced her arrival before she even entered my line of sight. Simone stepped directly between my aggressive father and me. She was wearing a flawless, tailored charcoal power suit, her posture incredibly rigid, her dark eyes blazing with a raw intensity that immediately forced Thomas to take a step back. Simone is legally married to my older brother Nathan, but much more importantly tonight, she is a ruthless, successful family law attorney, and the only person in this toxic family who has ever truly had my back. Thomas quickly recovered from his initial shock and glared at her. "This is private family business, Simone. Stay out of it." Simone laughed loudly, a dry, humorless sound that bounced off the hospital walls. "I am family, Thomas, and right now I am officially acting as Madeline's legal counsel. If you so much as casually brush her shoulder again, I will have you instantly arrested for assault on a pregnant woman. Do you genuinely want to spend your Saturday night in a cold holding cell, instead of the country club?" Catherine huffed loudly, crossing her arms defensively. "Simone, you are being ridiculous. We just need to pay for Abigail's necessary upgraded room. Madeline is being completely, disgustingly selfish." Simone turned her lethal gaze directly onto my mother. "Selfish? Catherine, are we really going to actively talk about who is selfish? Should we formally talk about the time you drained Madeline's entire, hard-earned college savings account?" The money she worked triple weekend shifts to earn, just so you could buy Abigail a brand new convertible for her high school graduation. Catherine gasped loudly, her face flushing a deep crimson. That was different. Abigail needed reliable transportation for college. And Madeline needed to take out 6 figures in predatory student loans. Simone fired back, stepping closer to my mother. You have intentionally used this woman as an ATM and a literal emotional punching bag for your entire life. That stops tonight. She is not paying a single dime for the woman who was just caught pantless in a crashed car with her own husband. Bradley shifted incredibly uncomfortably on his hospital bed, his face going pale under his heavy bandages. Simone, watch your mouth, he barked aggressively. Simone slowly turned to face Bradley. She casually reached into her designer leather tote bag and pulled out a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside the bag sat Bradley's damaged smartphone. The screen was shattered into a dense spiderweb of cracked glass, and dark dried blood smeared the edges of the casing. I spoke extensively with the responding officers out in the hallway, Simone said, holding the bag up so the harsh fluorescent lights caught the shattered glass. Since you are currently receiving medical treatment, and Madeline is your lawful spouse, the police released your personal effects directly to her. Well, to me, officially acting on her behalf. Thomas lunged forward, his arm outstretched to snatch the plastic bag. Give me that. He is my son-in-law. That is his private property. Simone sidestepped him with the grace of a trained matador, quickly dropping her shoulder to physically block his path. Touch me, Thomas, and I promise you will lose your entire pension in the upcoming civil suit. She unzipped the plastic bag and pulled out the shattered phone. She wiped a smear of blood off the screen with her thumb. Then she handed the phone directly to me. I bypassed the basic lock screen, Simone said, her voice dropping to a low, incredibly serious register. He actively used the exact date of your wedding anniversary as the passcode. How incredibly, sickeningly poetic. My hands shook slightly as I took the heavy, damaged device. The sharp glass scraped roughly against my palm. I looked directly at Bradley. The arrogant, hostile glare had vanished from his face. He looked terrified. He struggled to sit up, wincing loudly as the movement pulled on his injuries. Madeline, put that down right now, Bradley commanded, his voice cracking with sudden, overwhelming panic. Do not look at that. It is confidential work stuff, highly confidential client information. Shut up, Bradley, Simone snapped. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at the glowing screen in my hands. Madeline, do not look at his standard messages. I opened a secure, hidden folder. Read the WhatsApp thread. Read exactly what you are married to. I looked down at the illuminated screen. The cracks in the glass distorted the text slightly, but the words were incredibly, devastatingly clear. It was a private chat log active between Bradley and a contact saved simply as the letter A. My eyes quickly scanned the glowing text messages. The timestamp clearly showed these were sent just hours ago, right before the crash. A writes, I am so incredibly sick of sneaking around. When are we going to officially make this public? Her belly is huge, she looks ridiculous, and I hate that you have to go home to her. Bradley writes, soon babe, I promise, just stick to the timeline. A writes, I want that house. I picked out all the imported Italian tile for the kitchen. I am not letting her keep it. I felt the blood rapidly drain from my face, my knees went weak. But Simone placed a steady, incredibly grounding hand directly on the small of my back, keeping me physically upright. I scrolled down further, my thumb swiping against the jagged glass. The next set of messages made the breath catch in my throat. Bradley writes, you will get the house. We have the plan perfectly set. As soon as she gives birth, we implement it. She is already incredibly stressed. We will actively use that. We will commit her to a facility for severe postpartum psychosis. I legally have the medical proxy, A writes. And the baby? Bradley writes, we actively take the baby. I will get full, absolute sole custody. The courts will side with me if she is documented as mentally unstable in a psychiatric hold. We take the baby, we take the house, it will all be ours. I physically stopped breathing. The sterile smell of the hospital seemed to vanish, replaced by a cold, suffocating vacuum. My own husband and my biological sister were not just having a sordid, disgusting affair. They were actively, meticulously plotting to steal my newborn child. They were plotting to lock me away in a secure psychiatric ward to do it. I forced my thumb to swipe down one more time to the final message sent just minutes before the airbag deployed. Bradley writes, "Do not worry about her actively fighting us in court. She will not have a single dollar to hire a lawyer. I did it this morning. I have already moved the $400,000 to the Cayman accounts." She is broke. The emergency room faded away. The loud sound of my mother's complaining and my father's heavy breathing vanished into absolute, chilling silence. The $400,000, my entire life savings, the exact money I had painstakingly saved dollar by dollar from my intense accounting bonuses over the last decade to ensure my child had a secure future. It was gone. I stared intensely at the cracked, blood-stained screen. The sheer, overwhelming magnitude of the betrayal did not break me. Instead, a profound, incredibly terrifying calm washed over my entire body. The panic I deeply felt when I walked into the hospital evaporated entirely, leaving behind a cold, calculated clarity. They genuinely thought they could seamlessly steal my child. They actively thought they could leave me destitute. They deeply thought they were dealing with a boring, easily manipulated accountant. They have no idea what they just woke up. The automatic doors of the emergency room slid shut behind us, actively cutting off the sterile hospital glare and the chaotic shouting of my family. The heavy, humid night air hit my face like a damp towel. Rain lashed against the concrete, pooling in dark, oily puddles across the hospital parking lot. I stood still under the concrete awning, my hands wrapped protectively around my swollen stomach. The baby kicked sharply against my ribs, a sudden, powerful flutter of life contrasting with the absolute, irreversible death of my marriage. Simone walked beside me, her designer heels clicking a steady, militant rhythm on the wet pavement. She did not offer empty, hollow platitudes. She did not tell me everything would magically be okay. She simply guided me rapidly toward her sleek black Lexus securely parked under a flickering streetlight, her presence acting as a solid, impenetrable wall between me and the nightmare inside the building. I slid into the passenger seat, the luxury leather incredibly cold against my damp clothes. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing us inside a soundproof vault. The rain drummed a relentless, violent beat against the roof. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, my shallow breath slightly fogging the pain. My analytical mind raced intensely through the text messages I had just read. The betrayal was a physical weight, crushing the breath out of my lungs. But another specific detail from Bradley's message clawed viciously at the edges of my consciousness. He mentioned actively moving the money, my money. I reached frantically into my purse, my fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against my wallet and keys. I pulled out my primary smartphone. The screen glowed harshly in the dark cabin of the car. I quickly opened my secure banking app. The facial recognition rapidly scanned my tear-streaked face and granted full access. I navigated past the daily checking account and tapped directly on the high-yield savings tab. For the past 10 years, I had obsessively funneled every single bonus, every tax season overtime check, and every spare dollar directly into that account. It was my absolute safety net. It was the future college fund, the emergency reserve, the literal foundation of the future I thought I was securely building. Yesterday, the balance had proudly displayed $400,000. Tonight, the bold black numbers read exactly zero. My heart physically stopped. I blinked hard, swiping down to deeply refresh the screen, convinced it was a visual glitch or a severe network error caused by the raging storm. The loading circle spun rapidly, and the screen fully refreshed. Zero. I quickly tapped on the detailed transaction history. A single line item sat at the very top, executed just 45 minutes before Bradley wrapped his SUV around that oak tree. Outgoing wire transfer destination, Suncoast Holdings LLC amount $400,000. Status, cleared. He had timed it. He initiated the wire transfer on a Friday evening, knowing that the funds would move offshore immediately, disappearing into a dense labyrinth of Cayman Island shell companies before the domestic bank opened on Monday morning. He had gutted my life savings while consciously sitting in the passenger's seat next to my sister, probably laughing openly about how easy it was to seamlessly steal from the boring, predictable wife. A strangled, heavy gasp escaped my throat. I stared intensely at the glowing zero, the absolute, undeniable finality of it burning into my retinas. The $400,000 represented a full decade of my sweat, my missed lunches, my late nights staring at endless tax codes until my eyes bled. He took everything. Simone leaned over the center console, her sharp eyes locking onto my phone screen. Her jaw tightened heavily, the muscles ticking dangerously under her skin. She read the transaction line and let out a sharp, incredibly furious curse. "That absolute bastard," Simone hissed, her aggressive lawyer instincts instantly taking over. "He committed explicit federal wire fraud. He actually thinks he can successfully hide marital assets in an offshore shell company right before filing for a hostile divorce." Simone snatched her own phone from the dashboard mount. Her fingers flew rapidly across the keypad. "I am actively calling the bank fraud department right now," she commanded, her voice dropping into the same lethal tone she successfully used in the courtroom. "We are immediately flagging this transaction as unauthorized. Then I am directly calling the federal authorities. We will freeze his domestic accounts by midnight." He picked the absolute wrong woman to rob. She raised the phone to her ear, but before the first ring could possibly connect, I quickly reached out. I clamped my hand over her wrist. My physical grip was surprisingly strong. Simone paused immediately, looking at me in absolute shock. "Hang up," I said. My voice did not shake even slightly. The trembling in my fingers had completely stopped. The hot, pathetic tears that had been threatening to spill over my eyelashes dried up instantly, replaced by a glacial, unyielding calm. The terrified woman who had walked into that hospital a panicked, deeply betrayed housewife was gone. The woman currently sitting in the passenger seat of the Lexus was someone else entirely. "Madeline, he just stole your entire life savings," Simone argued, staring intently at me as if I had lost my mind. "We have a narrow window to rapidly recall an international wire. If we do not act right this exact second, that money is gone forever." "I know exactly where that money is rapidly going," I replied, my voice steady, stripped of all lingering emotion. "And I know precisely how he plans to hide it. If you call the bank fraud department right now, they will tip him off. He will intensely panic, he will cover his tracks, and he will use my own money to hire a ruthless defense team to carefully bury the funds deeper. I am not going to blindly let him do that. I want him to deeply feel safe. I want him to truly think he won." Simone slowly, cautiously lowered her phone. She studied my face carefully in the dim light of the car interior. The fierce, protective anger in her eyes shifted seamlessly into a deep, calculating curiosity. "What exactly are you going to proactively do?" she asked quietly. Without answering, I unbuckled my seatbelt and pushed the heavy car door open. The freezing rain hit me instantly, soaking through my maternity blouse, but I barely felt the intense cold. I marched to the back of the Lexus. Simone quickly popped the trunk release from inside. The lid swung upward, shielding me slightly from the heavy downpour. I reached past Simone's leather gym bag and grabbed the reinforced Pelican case I always kept locked securely in the back of my vehicle. The matte black surface was unremarkable, as it was designed to be. I hauled the case out, slammed the trunk shut, and rapidly slid back into the passenger seat, bringing a gust of wet air with me. Water dripped from my hair onto the luxury leather upholstery. I carefully placed the case directly on my lap, securely right above my pregnant belly. I rapidly popped the heavy steel latches. Inside rested a thick, specialized military-grade laptop bearing a discreet, embossed federal seal. It was not a standard commercial corporate computer. It was a secure, encrypted terminal, exclusively issued directly to the top-tier agents of the United States Treasury Department. I flipped the screen open. The biometric scanner immediately flashed, intensely reading my fingerprint and scanning my retinas. A bright green light rapidly pulsed in the dark cabin, and the complex command prompt quickly blinked to life, seamlessly granting me unfettered access to the most powerful financial tracking network on the planet. Simone stared at the glowing seal on the screen, her dark eyes incredibly wide. You actually brought it. I never leave it at home, I murmured, my trained fingers actively hovering directly over the keys. Bradley spent our entire pathetic marriage treating me exactly like a glorified calculator. He never bothered to actually understand what a senior forensic auditor for the Internal Revenue Service does. He truly thinks he is a literal mastermind for setting up a basic Cayman Island shell corporation. I typed the name of his holding company into the federal database query. The screen immediately began pulling complex routing numbers, deeply hidden offshore registries, and secure proxy directors. I turned to look at Simone, a cold, purely predatory smile forming on my lips. Bradley deeply thinks he can effectively hide wire fraud directly from a senior forensic auditor. Let him actively dig. 20 minutes later, we were rapidly riding the private, secure elevator up to the 42nd floor of Simone's downtown law firm. The violent storm battered the floor-to-ceiling windows, bright lightning illuminating the entire city skyline in brief, violent flashes. Simone locked the heavy glass doors to her corner office and quickly pulled down the thick privacy blinds. I immediately set up my secure terminal on her polished mahogany desk. I was officially tapped directly into the absolute, most powerful financial tracking network on the planet. He rapidly routed your $400,000 through a standard Cayman Island clearinghouse, I stated, my fingers flying across the backlit keyboard. It is a deeply standard obfuscation tactic. You quickly bounce the wire through 3 different shell companies, just to make the money look like it vanished. Simone leaned over my shoulder. Can you actually bypass the clearinghouse without actively triggering an alert directly on his end? Simone, I intensely track international crime syndicates for the federal government, I seamlessly replied, my voice devoid of any basic warmth. Bradley literally used a generic amateur offshore service. I am already past the clearinghouse. I hit the enter key aggressively, running a rapid cross-reference on the destination routing number. The screen flashed bright green, a massive, staggering cascade of hidden ledgers and deeply secret corporate accounts flooded the entire monitor. I narrowed my eyes, scanning the dense columns of Bradley's elite exclusive wealth management fund. This was the incredibly prestigious fund that actively paid for his luxury sports cars and his unbearable superiority complex. But the raw numbers never lie. Look closely at this, I said, firmly pointing to a glaring discrepancy in his third-quarter operational ledger. He is actively moving legitimate client dividends into a ghost account specifically to successfully cover massive initial capital withdrawals. Simone frowned heavily, her sharp legal mind actively processing the complex financial data. He is paying older investors with new money from new investors. Madeline, his elite wealth fund is failing. It is not just failing, I corrected, pulling up a secondary spreadsheet hidden beneath dense layers of false invoices. It is a illegal Ponzi scheme. He is bleeding his clients' life savings dry, and meticulously look at where the stolen capital is bleeding out. I highlighted a series of rapid wire transfers dating back over the last 8 months. The destination accounts were widely scattered across Europe, Paris, Milan, Monaco. I actively cross-referenced the European transfers with the exact timeline of Abigail's luxurious gap year. On May 14th, $40,000 was siphoned from a client's secure retirement portfolio and rapidly wired to a deeply boutique luxury hotel in Paris. That was the exact specific day Abigail enthusiastically posted a photo of herself casually drinking expensive champagne in a Parisian penthouse. He has been funding Abigail's entire European luxury shopping spree, Simone whispered, her voice laced with absolute unfiltered disgust. He stole your biological sister away and he actively used his unsuspecting client's entire life savings to pay for it. Which is exactly why he needed to steal my money tonight, I stated, the puzzle pieces clicking together with terrifying, absolute clarity. His Ponzi scheme is collapsing. He is critically, desperately short on cash. My $400,000 was not just to leave me destitute. It was a desperate band-aid intended to actively keep him out of federal prison. I felt a cold, vicious energy surging through my veins. The man who had mocked my complex career was about to learn how dangerous a scorned senior auditor could be. I am going to freeze his offshore accounts right now, I said, my hands hovering over the keyboard. I am going to rapidly trigger a silent, aggressive federal audit on his entire firm. Wait, Simone said, placing her hand gently on my wrist. Heavily check his domestic assets first. Explicitly check the marital house. If he was actively planning to commit you directly to a psychiatric ward to successfully take sole custody of the baby, he would have securely secured the entire marital property to ensure you simply could not fight him. I quickly nodded, opening a new terminal window to rapidly access the secure state property registry. I bypassed the basic public search portal and directly pulled the sensitive raw deed history for our sprawling, $2 million home. The progress bar spun for an agonizing second before the official document successfully loaded on the screen. I stared at the name listed under the current property owner. My breath hitched in my throat. Bradley's name was gone, my name was gone. He forged my entire signature on a quitclaim deed. I deeply breathed, my voice barely a whisper in the quiet office. Who actively owns it? Simone asked, stepping incredibly closer. I actively highlighted the bold, explicit text at the top of the official registry document. He transferred the deed 7 days ago to hide it from me in the upcoming divorce. Our $2 million marital home is now legally owned actively by a private holding company named Apex LLC. I left Simone actively at her firm, the high-speed laser printers already rapidly spitting out the preliminary freeze orders for Bradley's entire domestic accounts, and actively drove straight back to the sprawling $2 million estate I had spent the last 5 years meticulously turning into a home. The relentless rain had finally slowly slowed to a steady, miserable drizzle, slicking the long cobblestone driveway. I only intended to pack my secure passport, my late grandmother's heirloom jewelry, and a few weeks' worth of maternity clothes before relocating to a secure hotel. I quickly unlocked the mahogany front door and stepped into the grand foyer. The house was blazing with light, loud, abrasive laughter actively echoed down the curved, sweeping staircase. It was not the sound of a family mourning a shattered marriage or a traumatic car accident. It was the exact sound of an unapologetic celebration. I climbed the stairs, my hand gripping the polished oak banister, my breath actively catching slightly in my throat. The heavy double doors to my master bedroom were thrown wide open. I stepped directly into the doorway and actively froze. Heavy-duty black contractor garbage bags littered my pristine, expensive hardwood floor like discarded, tragic bodies. Standing in the exact center of my walk-in closet was my mother, Catherine. She was yanking my incredibly expensive, custom-tailored maternity dresses off their delicate velvet hangers, actively balling up the delicate fabric and shoving them into the cheap plastic bags. Abigail lounged directly on my California king bed, a small, pristine white bandage casually taped actively over the tiny, superficial scratch on her forehead. She was wearing one of Bradley's oversized cashmere sweaters, casually scrolling on her phone with her uninjured hand, while elegantly sipping sparkling water from my absolute favorite crystal glass. What exactly are you actively doing? I asked, my voice did not shake, it actively cut through the room like a steel blade. Catherine did not even flinch. She tossed a handful of my silk maternity blouses into the nearest bag and turned to face me, her hands planted firmly on her hips. Her expression was devoid of any maternal warmth, carrying only the stern irritation of a landlord dealing with an unwanted, tragic tenant. I stared at the toxic woman who actively gave birth to me, my analytical mind struggling to process the sheer depravity of the scene. You are actively moving my biological sister into my own bed, less than 4 hours after I caught her sleeping with my own husband. Abigail rolled her eyes, loudly letting out a massive, exaggerated sigh, as she casually tossed her phone onto the mattress. Do not be so tragic and dramatic, Madeline. Bradley said you two were practically just basic roommates anyway. Besides, I need the deep soaking tub for my tense back. The hospital bed was an absolute tragic nightmare, and my delicate muscles are incredibly tense. Catherine tied off a garbage bag filled with my heavy winter coats and shoved it toward the hallway with her expensive foot. You need to actively go pack whatever is left in the guest bathroom and find yourself a cheap studio apartment downtown. You can actively come back for these heavy bags tomorrow. Or I will just actively have the landscaper leave them on the curb. This is my house, I stated, stepping actively over a discarded heavy bag containing my favorite shoes. I picked out the imported Italian tile. I actively designed every single square inch of this property. Catherine loudly let out a sharp, mocking bark of laughter. It is Bradley's house, Madeline. He is a powered, successful investment director. He paid the mortgage. He pays for the expensive landscaping. You just sit at a boring desk crunching numbers for the government. Do not be tragically greedy. You have always been so terribly greedy with your sweet sister. The sheer audacity of the aggressive accusation actively hung in the stale air. Greedy, my tragic life had been a series of forced donations to the altar of Abigail, meticulously orchestrated by a mother who saw me only as a financial resource to be plundered for her golden child. Now she was literally bagging up my life, treating me like a tragic stray dog, to casually hand my $2 million home over to the sister who had destroyed my marriage. A hot scream built up in the back of my throat, demanding to be let out. I wanted to tear the black plastic bags open. I wanted to rip the expensive cashmere sweater off my sister's back. I wanted to physically throw them both out into the freezing rain and lock the mahogany doors forever. But then the weight of the leather strap biting into my shoulder brought me back to reality. I remembered the encrypted IRS laptop sitting safely inside my bag. I remembered the offshore Cayman accounts, the forged quitclaim deed, and the multi-million-dollar federal wire fraud Bradley had woven right into the foundation of this very property. This house did not belong to Bradley anymore. It actively belonged to a fraudulent shell company named Apex LLC, and within exactly 72 hours, when the massive federal indictments rapidly rained down, this house was going to belong to the United States government. The scream died in my throat. The icy predatory calm washed over me once again, shielding my heart in ice. I did not yell. I did not shed a single tragic tear. I did not actively give them the satisfaction of watching me break. I calmly walked over to my nightstand, picked up my laptop bag, and securely adjusted it on my shoulder. I looked around the luxurious bedroom, taking in the expensive imported fixtures, the expensive linens, and my mother standing victorious among the garbage bags of my old life. I actively smiled heavily, warmly at my sister. "Enjoy the house, Abigail," I said, my voice echoing with terrifying sweetness. "I hope you love what comes with it." The long drive to Simone's property in the upscale historic district was a blur of rapidly sweeping windshield wipers and hypnotic streetlights. Simone had a converted carriage house nestled at the back of her manicured garden. It was a sleek, minimalist space of exposed brick and polished concrete. It felt cold, but tonight I welcomed the chill. I needed the temperature to match the ice running through my veins. I dropped my wet coat on a stool and immediately set my pelican case on the glass dining table. I did not unpack my overnight bag. I did not inspect the plush queen bed waiting in the loft. I flipped open the military-grade laptop, let the secure biometric scanner read my retinas, and dove straight back into the powerful federal financial tracking network. For the next 9 hours I did not sleep. I barely blinked. I traced every single wire transfer Bradley had authorized over the past 3 years. I mapped the architecture of his collapsing Ponzi scheme, connecting the fraudulent dividend payouts to the offshore accounts funding Abigail's European vacations. By explicit sunrise, I had a digital dossier enough to put my husband in federal prison for a decade. At exactly 7 in the morning, the heavy adrenaline finally, actively crashed, leaving me with a pounding headache and a deeply desperate need for caffeine. Simone had already left for her firm, texting me to treat the carriage house as my own. I threw on a dry sweater, grabbed my umbrella, and walked 3 blocks to a bustling artisanal coffee shop on the corner of Elm Street. The cafe was packed with morning commuters and local professionals. I ordered a black tea and stood near the pickup counter, mentally reviewing the sequence of federal asset freezes I was going to execute at noon. Madeline, the voice was sharply aggressive and unfamiliar. I actively turned around. A man in a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit stood uncomfortably close to me. He held a massive taped manila envelope. Before I could even actively register his face, he shoved the package against my heavy chest. Instinctively, my hands came up to catch it before it hit my swollen stomach. "You have been served," he barked loudly. He did not lower his heavy voice, he practically shouted it, ensuring that half the coffee shop turned their heavy heads to watch the pregnant woman actively get publicly ambushed. "Your husband's legal team said you were dodging calls." The process server sneered, stepping back and rapidly snapping a quick photo of me holding the envelope with his phone. "Have a nice day, lady." He turned and shoved his exact way out of the heavy cafe, the glass door rattling on its hinges. I calmly picked up my heavy tea from the counter, actively walked to a small table in the far corner of the room, and sat down. I slid my heavy thumb under the tape and ripped the heavy envelope open. Bradley was not just filing for divorce, he was launching a preemptive scorched earth military strike. He knew what he had done with my money and the marital home, and he was striking first to control the narrative. I pulled out the thick stack of legal petitions, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. It was a petition for an expedited, fault-based divorce. But the explicit, actual demands made the breath stall in my lungs. I flipped to the custody arrangement section. Bradley was petitioning the court for sole physical and legal custody of our unborn child. The explicit justification was typed in bold, uncompromising letters. He alleged that I suffered from severe and dangerous mental instability. I actively read the supporting affidavit, and the exact words seemed to drop out actively from underneath me. The exact sworn testimony was not from a doctor or a psychiatrist. It was from my own mother. Catherine had provided a signed, notarized statement to Bradley's priced legal team. In it, she detailed a fabricated history of my alleged hysterical episodes. She swore under penalty of perjury that I had suffered a mental break the night of the accident, that I had abandoned my critically injured husband in the emergency room, and that my erratic behavior posed an imminent threat to the safety of a newborn infant. Catherine had sold me out. She had explicitly entered a perjured statement into a court of law just to ensure that Abigail got to keep the $2 million house and the wealthy, successful husband. My mother was willing to let a judge tear my baby from my arms just to guarantee her golden child's financial security. The sheer depravity of the aggressive betrayal was so profound it transcended pain. It crystallized into a terrifying, massive clarity. They thought I was just a boring, predictable number cruncher who would fold under the pressure of a public, aggressive legal assault. They thought taking my home and threatening my heavy child would force me to actively surrender. I turned to the final page of the petition, reaching the financial demands. Bradley had already stolen my $400,000 life savings. He had transferred our marital estate to a shell company. I assumed he was simply trying to walk away clean. I was explicitly wrong. Bradley was demanding $5,000 a month in permanent, aggressive spousal support. I stared at the black ink, reading the justification paragraph 3 times to ensure my exhausted eyes were not playing tricks on me. Bradley claimed that the horrific aggressive trauma of wrapping his luxury SUV around an oak tree had left him with severely debilitating, incredibly paralyzing PTSD. He claimed he was completely unable to work and required me to financially support him and Abigail. They wanted everything. I pulled my encrypted smartphone from my pocket and rapidly dialed Simone. She actively answered on the exact first heavy ring. "File the freezing orders," I commanded, my voice devoid of warmth. "Burn his firm to the ground." 72 hours later, Bradley was hosting a lavish welcome home dinner at my $2 million house to celebrate his discharge from the hospital. The end caterers had set up a pristine buffet in the dining room. My parents, Catherine and Thomas, were in attendance, proudly sipping vintage champagne. Abigail was lounging on the custom velvet sofa in the center of the living room, reveling in her new, stolen life. They genuinely thought they had won. They deeply believed the forged divorce papers, the perjured affidavit, and the actively stolen $400,000 had broken me into absolute submission. They were so arrogant that they did not even actively notice the fleet of armored black SUVs rapidly surrounding the entire property. The heavy imported mahogany front door did not just swing open. It was violently breached off its heavy hinges by a steel battering ram. The deafening crash brought the lavish celebration to an immediate, absolute dead halt. Dozens of armed FBI and IRS criminal investigation agents clad in dark tactical gear swarmed directly into the grand foyer. I walked calmly directly behind the lead federal agent. My hair was pulled back into a severe, sharp bun, and I wore a tailored black maternity blazer. I was no longer the boring, predictable accountant they thought they could seamlessly destroy. I was a senior forensic auditor, acting with the full devastating weight of the United States Treasury Department. Bradley froze near the marble fireplace, his champagne glass slipping from his hand and shattering on the floor. Catherine stood up, her face draining of all color, as she actively saw me walking directly into the living room. Free, untouched. Abigail screamed hysterically as two federal agents grabbed Bradley, forcefully slamming him against the expensive wall to securely lock his wrists in heavy steel handcuffs. What exactly is the explicit meaning of this? Thomas bellowed loudly, his heavy voice cracking with sheer absolute terror. This is a private residence. You cannot barge in here without a warrant. The lead agent stepped forward, holding up a stack of official, stamped federal documents. Bradley, the agent announced loudly, his voice echoing through the house. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, tax evasion, grand larceny, running an illegal multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme, and executing the illicit trafficking of stolen domestic funds. The Department of Justice has officially frozen every single asset associated with your firm, your illegal offshore Cayman accounts, and the fraudulent shell company known as Apex LLC. The entire room gasped in unison. The massive, devastating shockwave of the absolute truth rapidly rippled through the house. The stolen $400,000 has been intercepted by international authorities and actively returned to your wife, the agent continued. Furthermore, this property, fraudulently transferred to Apex LLC, has been officially seized by the federal government. Abigail was sobbing violently, pulling at the agents, actively dragging Bradley toward the front door. I stepped slowly up to my parents. Catherine's expensive hands were trembling completely. The invincible, incredibly matriarch was finally shattered into absolute dust. You swore under penalty of perjury that I was unstable, I said calmly, my voice steady, carrying no anger, only the cold, hard weight of justice. You tried to steal my unborn child just to guarantee Abigail's financial security. But you forgot what I do for a living. I pulled a crisp, official federal document from my heavy blazer and held it up. Your retirement portfolio is gone, Thomas, I stated, looking into my father's terrified eyes. I traced where you invested your life savings. You put everything into Bradley's elite wealth management fund. And because it was a Ponzi scheme paying for Abigail's European trips, the federal government has seized all of it. You have nothing left. Catherine fell hard to her knees, her expensive designer jewelry clinking pathetically against the floor. She reached out, trying to grab my hand, her voice a desperate sobbing plea. Madeline, please, we are your parents. You cannot do this to us. I am not doing anything to you, I actively replied, my heavy voice devoid of any explicit sympathy. You did this to yourselves. You chose the heavy daughter you wanted. Now, you get to keep her. Penniless. I turned my back on them. I did not watch as the federal agents hauled Bradley out of the house in handcuffs. I did not listen to Catherine's desperate, pathetic screams. I simply walked away, my head held, seamlessly stepping out into the cool, refreshing evening air. Waiting actively for me by Simone's black Lexus was absolute, unyielding freedom. I got into the passenger seat, looking at the $2 million house for the last absolute time. Never let anyone convince you that your silence is a weakness. Sometimes the best explicit thing you can possibly do is let people blindly believe they have broken you. Let them get comfortable in their cruelty. Let them build their explicit glass houses on a fractured foundation of lies. And when the time is, when they are at the very height of their stolen success, you do not just casually throw a stone. You systematically, analytically dismantle the foundation and watch the whole tragic empire crash down around them. You do not need their hollow validation. You do not need their fake apologies. You only need the cold truth.